How are you feeling? How long have you been here?
3 months, May 17th.
And what brought you?
That's difficult to answer.
I'm not clear. How is it that playing the piano for people has eventually resulted in your being here in the hospital?
That's difficult to answer.
this the end? There's a noise inside my head of crying people facing death. Is this the end? Is this the end? I'm burning in the stone. There's no place to hide. I'm burning in the stone. This is the final time. What have we done to the world? What have we done to the world? I'm burning in the stone. There's no place to hide. I'm burning in the stone. This is the final
What up, everyone? Happy Tuesday. Happy day after Inauguration Day, where hopefully we will start to get back to a little bit of normalcy, or perhaps a new normal, under the second Trump administration. You know what? I spent some time picking through Trump's executive orders last night. I'm not thrilled. I'm not mad at it. Trump actually did do a good job, I think, with two of the executive orders specifically, the ones around gender ideology and the ones around DEI. I don't love them, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But you know what? Like, I think, good first step. Good first step. You can't get everything, and to be quite frank, I was completely expecting that Donald Trump was going to screw up these executive orders. I completely appreciated that, like, Trump is just going to screw up the wording, or he's going to make it be about white people when it's not about white people, and he's not going to have the right things in there, just because that's what's happened over and over and over and over and over again. It's what happened with the anti-CRT legislation, where they claimed that they banned CRT, but they didn't actually ban CRT because they made it about something that wasn't about CRT at all. And so I was worried. I was like, Trump is going to screw this up, and I think he did better than I anticipated. And at the moment, I'll take that. I don't even need a high bar at this point. I'll take, like, you like, my expectations were here and you came in here. Okay, winning. Winning. You came in better than expected, Trump, all right? So we're going to talk a little bit about that today, guys. But today what we're really going to do is we're going to be doing the recording of the second train, or that, not second. We're going to be doing a recording of my book club podcast. So if you're new here, I have a book club, kind of. It's called the Counter-Revolutionary Book Club. And this is a podcast that I've just started where we are reading some of the most dystopian documents that you're going to find anywhere. And these are the documents that are influencing today's modern queer activists, influencing gender activists, gender ideology, in ways that a lot of people really don't understand. So if you like dystopian novels, if you like things like 1984 and Brave New World and Fahrenheit 451 and, things like that, like those are the books that, like, I grew up on. I love that stuff. This is real life dystopia is what this is. This is like you're walking into 1984, but this is real life. This is all happening right now. And I don't care what executive orders Trump issues. he's not going to stop this. He's really not. He might slow it down in the federal government. And listen, like I said, I am actually kind of on board with some of the things that Trump did in those executive orders. I think they're good first steps. However, I also know that executive orders are not going to solve the problem, because the problem is already too ingrained. It's been around for decades and decades and decades. This particular problem has been around since it kind of started in the 60s, really started getting out there in the 70s, exploded in the 80s and 90s. And what happened in the 80s and 90s, which is like a result of already 4 decades of development, is what's really pushing what is going on today. And so you don't get rid of all that with an executive order. You really don't. And so it's important for us to understand what we're dealing with. It's important for us to understand where these ideas come from. And I don't think that anyone else on the internet of any sort of credibility is covering this sort of stuff from an anti-communist perspective. And not only am I covering it, we're doing this together. This is not about me. This is about we. This is about all of us. Because, of course, the goal of listening to these documents or analyzing these documents, reading them, watching the far left videos that we watch all the time on this channel, the purpose is not just for entertainment, although it can be entertaining. The purpose is that we want to be able to learn as much as we can about the left. We want to be able to learn how to explain what they're doing clearly and concisely and in plain English. And we want to be able to go out there and teach other people and have evidence and receipts to be able to back up what we say is happening, because what we say is happening sounds kind of unbelievable until you realize that this is happening in real life right now. And we're going to read one of the documents today that is driving this ideology. And so we're going to talk more about that in a minute as people are kind of streaming in. I've got one order of business specifically that I need to take care of. It is a point of personal privilege. I do apologize. The drama will last for 10 minutes tops. I promise. I just need to do this because I do, okay? And then we're going to spend the rest of the time doing this. We're going to have just a teeny tiny bit of drama because I need to speak to something, and then we're going to do this for the rest of the time. Is everyone on board with that? Okay. All right. Please allow me to walk you through what happened last night. So, to catch everyone up to speed, last week, James Lindsay, along with people like Psycho Frank McCormick, who is one of James Lindsay's attack dogs, James Lindsay accused me of grooming his 28-year-old stepdaughter because I sent her a DM on Twitter when she was getting attacked by a lot of people and called a whore all over the internet. And I sent her a DM and I was like, listen, I know this really sucks and here's how you handle this and I hope things are okay and just private your account and this is not real and don't let it get to you and all this stuff. I just tried to offer her some very basic support that she wasn't getting from anywhere else, including from her stepfather. And I never actually expected to hear back from her, but she did respond and we started talking, and all I did was offer support. All I did was offer, like, honestly, like, I've been in your shoes. I know how this internet cancel bullshit goes. It sucks. Just here's how you get through it. Just keep your head about you. Here's what you need to do. Here's what you need to know. Because I watched her step in something in terms of she started tweeting before I ever even spoke to her. She started tweeting that James was in an open marriage with her mother. And it was getting back to, like, really bad people, and those really bad people were starting to figure out she was James's stepdaughter, and they were starting to use that against James because they hate James. Now, I obviously have no love lost for James. However, the fact of the matter is I don't like seeing people attacked like that, and I kind of thought, and I said this on a live stream at the time, she doesn't know what she's getting into. And I also said at the time, I was like, this is going to get me in trouble. I know that doing this is going to get me into trouble, but I don't care. You want to know why? Because if I see someone that's in trouble, I want to help them. Because I'm not actually the psycho that James seems to think I am. I am actually just like a normal person. So I sent her a couple DMs. I said, here's what's going on. It's going to be okay. She started responding. We started chit-chatting back and forth. There was really nothing going on. But I maybe dangled a few carrots in front of James just to piss him off. And then James started telling everyone on the internet that I was grooming his 28-year-old stepdaughter. And James and Frank started to make it seem like they were trying to make it seem like she was like a 14-year-old or something, which was fucking gross. They were putting all this stuff out there to try to make people think that I was talking to James's teenage stepdaughter, which I wasn't. The woman is 28 years old. She lives on her own. She doesn't even talk to James. They haven't even really talked for years, probably because James was an asshole. Anyway, so he accused me of grooming, and she was in my DMs the whole time. And she was saying, I cannot fucking believe he's doing this. Does James think I'm stupid? Like, she was really, really, really pissed off at James for saying that she was being groomed. And I just kept telling her, I was like, don't say nothing public. Just don't do it. Just because she's now changed her account to a new account that's private, that she didn't want anyone to know about. And I was like, just keep your account private. Like, it'll be fine. Like, I don't really care. James is an asshole. Well, last night she finally got tired of it, and she actually created kind of a new account, but it's her old account name. She basically went back, she created another account with her old account name on it. And this was entirely her doing. I didn't know she was doing this. She didn't tell me until afterwards. And so she started responding to Frank McCormick, who had been tweeting all this shit about me grooming her, and she said, I am not being groomed. Stop spreading misinformation about me for views. I am a grown fucking adult, and it makes me it makes it very clear to me that your concern isn't with my well-being, but with getting attention. And then Frank blocked her for responding to him because he didn't like that. And then she was pissed off and she tweeted, not my stepdad's guard dog blocking me, LMAO. He clearly doesn't care about my well-being, just his views. And she's right about that. So I posted it saying, hey guys, James Lindsay's daughter says that I'm not actually grooming her. Can everyone just shut up now? And I also said she seems to be insinuating that she's, pissed off at James. I just did a little history of how we got here. I posted Bot's picture of James definitely not fucking a goat. And then after that, again, Psycho Frank McCormick, but James Lindsay retweeted this. Psycho Frank says, we must all, in the strongest words possible, condemn Karlin Borisenko's use of her psychology background to groom James Lindsay's vulnerable and troubled daughter into providing family dirt she can publicize. So a couple things. One, to be clear, I literally just talked to the girl. I didn't actually even do anything. Two, she didn't provide me with the dirt. She tweeted the dirt publicly before I ever even spoke to the girl. She posted it all publicly on the internet. I maybe had a couple other pieces of inside information, but it wasn't stuff that I asked her for. It was just stuff that she gave me. But Frank says, this affects all of us, and we must be united in a zero tolerance policy. Well, I don't know who the fuck elected Frank McCormick and James Lindsay to be the arbiter of who is allowed to talk to a 28-year-old adult that doesn't live at home, that doesn't take money from James or his wife, that isn't really involved in their life in any way, and you assholes want to declare that I can't DM her and say, hey, I hope everything's okay, this internet shit is crazy? Go fuck yourselves. And then Frank said, I blocked the individual claiming to be Lindsay's daughter to establish clear boundaries. It is not my place to hear her side or even discuss the situation. Well, that's funny, Frank. That's funny that you're saying it's not your place to discuss the situation because you flat out been saying for days now that I'm grooming her. So, Frank, you are discussing the situation every single time you make the absolutely absurd claim that I'm grooming her, because every single time, retard, that you make that claim, you are insulting her intelligence and pissing her off. Which is why she tweeted at you to cut the shit in the first place. But no, James, being that he is stepfather of the fucking year, took Frank's side over his own stepdaughter. So then it continued. Let's see. Oh, here's where they're like, one of the characteristics of being groomed successfully is to fail to recognize they're being groomed. So now they're saying the only reason that James Lindsay's stepdaughter is saying that I'm not being groomed, assholes, will you please shut up about this, is because she just isn't smart enough to recognize that she's being groomed. Yeah, okay, James, okay, Frank, all right, whatever. Let's see. So then James Lindsay's stepdaughter replied directly to James. And again, I didn't know she did this. I didn't find out she did this till after. She replied directly to James, and she posted some text messages that she and James had shared a while ago, in which James said that he loved her. And the text messages were actually very sweet, honestly. But I think she was trying to prove to James, like, this is actually me. This is because what these people always do is they say that I created the account. I didn't create this account. This is actually James Lindsay's stepdaughter. And so she posted these text messages that he had sent her that he would recognize in his replies to say, hi, this is actually me. This isn't Carlin. This isn't one of Carlin's friends or cult members or whatever you want to say. This is actually me. And she said, I've exchanged a few messages with someone you don't like, and you are spreading lies about me for views. Instead of communicating with me, you are using me for views just like Frank. I am very real. Please stop. How can someone who used to talk to me like this use me the way you are right now? That all came from her. I didn't do shit. And so then James blocked her, which is interesting because James has been running around all over the internet for days now claiming that I groomed her, but refuses to call and check in on her. James is so worried about his stepdaughter being groomed by the evil psychopath that he refuses to call her. And then finally she gets sick of his shit and she starts responding to him with text messages to prove that it's her, and he blocked her account. Stepfather of the fucking year. Stepfather of the year. And so then she tweeted those screenshots and she said, my own stepdad blocked me for standing up for myself. There is no clearer signal that he only cares about himself than this. If you see any tweets about me being groomed, know they are for clout or for this man to gain more sympathy and money. None of this came from me. I've been saying for days now that James needs to fucking call his stepdaughter because she's getting really pissed off at his bullshit. I was very clear. I have done multiple streams where I kept saying, you better call her, you better call her, you better call her. She's really pissed off. She really doesn't like this. You know, he didn't call her. So too bad, so sad. You get what you get. So I retweeted her and I said, James Lindsay has now blocked his own stepdaughter because she asked him to stop saying she was being groomed by me, and posted text messages he sent her saying he loved her as proof of who she is. This comes after James refused to communicate privately. And then James responded. James retweeted that out to his audience and responded in exactly the way you think he might. He said, this is simple. I did it to establish boundaries and protect her from the people that want to exploit her to get to me. I didn't want her saying things in the comments that my many enemies would see and exploit. Stay away from my family, you grooming pick 2 psychopath. James. And you know what? I actually just said this. I said this in my response to him. I said it right here. James, do you know how you could have protected her from being exposed to your actual enemies? And by the way, bro, you might think I'm a pain in the ass, and yeah, I am kind of a pain in the ass, but I'm not your actual fucking enemy. I'm not Patrick Casey. I'm not the person that attacked your stepdaughter and posted that she was an OnlyFans whore all over the internet. I was the one, when you refused, that reached out to your stepdaughter to give her sage advice about how to handle internet toxicity, just like the toxicity that you're exhibiting right now. You didn't do that shit, James. You should have been the first one on the phone to your fucking stepdaughter when she started posting that you're in an open marriage with her mother, and you should have been, hey honey, I'm really pissed off at what you posted, but can we talk about this? Because you're about to step in a load of shit and you don't know what's coming. That should have been you. That shouldn't have come from me. That should have come from you. You refused to do it. Every single time I've said, call your stepdaughter, call your stepdaughter, call your stepdaughter. You are the one that has refused to fucking do it. And now you have the gall, you unmitigated jackass, to say that you blocked your own stepdaughter on Twitter when she was reaching out to you to try to talk to you, and you blocked her to protect her from your enemies exploiting her to get to you. This could have been solved at any time, James, by you picking up the fucking phone and contacting your stepdaughter. And maybe, James, maybe if you had done that, your stepdaughter could have shown you our entire fucking messaging history so that you can see that you are literally making shit up that did not happen. And maybe one day I will release the entire messaging history, but I'm just not ready to do that right now, mostly because I don't want to break any sort of like confidentiality that I have with this person, because unless I'm really driven to the point of needing to release private messages, I don't like doing it. But I will tell you, if those messages ever get released, you're not going to see me asking her for information about what goes on at home. You're not going to see me love bombing her. You're not going to see me saying or doing anything inappropriate with her. You're going to see me giving her sage advice over how to deal with the bullshit on the internet and her father being a fucking retard and dragging this shit all over the public to your 500,000 followers. Are you out of your fucking mind? I've certainly had my fair share of beef on the internet, and I don't regret any of it. And I will never back down when people try to fuck me over or stab me in the back. But dragging out James is taking a blowtorch to his relationship with his own stepdaughter. James is like throwing lighter fluid on something that already, quite frankly, wasn't in a great place to begin with. He's throwing lighter fluid on it and taking a fucking blowtorch to it. That is what is happening right now. Because James refuses to be an adult, get the fuck off the internet, stop posting shit about her being psychologically groomed and manipulated when I know she hasn't been. She knows she hasn't been. Anyone with a fucking brain know that's not what's going on here, because we can look and see who is behaving like the retarded fucking asshole in this situation. And you know what? Listen, man, I don't have the best relationship with my father. I understand what it's like to get hit in the face with the fact that the person that raised you doesn't really fucking love you, and it really pisses me off on her behalf. Because your stepdaughter is a nice girl, James. Your stepdaughter is a nice girl. And she doesn't deserve this shit. And I don't give a flying fuck what political disagreements the two of you have had in the past. You should have just picked up the phone and called her, James. Your stepdaughter and I have very different political opinions, and yet we have been able to communicate effectively with each other. Do you want to know why? because I'm not throwing our differences of opinions in her fucking face all the time, which I'm betting is exactly what happened when you had your falling out over what you claim is around Trump. Your daughter doesn't have any problem with my political opinions, James. She's still talking to me. So why can't you pick up the phone and call her? Why can't you say, honey, can we put all this behind us and have a private conversation off the fucking internet? That is what needs to happen right now. The tweeting needs to fucking stop. This is goddamn ridiculous. And the fact that I have to say this to a grown-ass man, it is mind-boggling to me. It is absolutely fucking mind-boggling that this is what is going on. This is considered to be more preferable to picking up the fucking phone. And P.S., I don't know who needs to hear this, but if I was actually grooming your stepdaughter, James, if I was actually grooming her, screaming that you need to pick up the fucking phone and talk to her in private is the very last thing that I would be doing. Because I would be doing everything in my power to prevent her from communicating with you in private. Instead, I'm saying, asshole, she's right there. Go talk to your stepdaughter. But that's not the end of this little story. That's not the end at all. That's not the end at all. Because earlier today, a couple hours ago, James, instead of calling his stepdaughter, is now declaring that I need to be arrested and banned off of X and YouTube because I'm saying words he doesn't like. So, you can see here our friend Haley Shane. They, them, Haley Shane. I still don't know what Haley's gender is. I really don't. I still don't know what Haley's gender is. I have no fucking idea. So we're going to call Haley they, them. They, them, Haley. I made a little update about Haley last night. For those who don't know, Too Long Didn't Read. About a week ago, Haley went viral on the internet for saying that they had secret recordings of an Antifa meeting. And then when I asked they, them to release the recordings, they, them lost their shit all over the internet and started complaining about me and doing all this stuff about me. And so then I said, I bet they, them doesn't have recordings. I bet they, them doesn't have recordings at all. And turns out I was right. Do you want to know why? Because there ain't been no interview. There ain't been no recordings released. There ain't been nothing. Nothing ever happened with it. What a waste. And so I posted that on Twitter this morning to take my victory lap that I was absolutely correct about this person. And they, them responded. And she's trying to claim that I attempted to dox they, them's location. Except all I did, I didn't attempt to dox shit. All I did was show, and maybe she's updated they, them. I'm sorry, I'm misgendering. Maybe they, them has updated their public-facing website, which is thebrandwild.com, free advertising for they, them right there, where she literally has a map of her location or where she claims she's going to be because she is a traveling fucking marketer. This is public on the internet. It is linked in her profile. She has a fucking map on the fucking website. This isn't doxing they, them. I'm very sorry. You might claim that me going to a link in your public Twitter profile where you literally have a map. You have a map, not even just any map, a branded map that you have created to travel around the country creating logos or whatever the fuck you're doing. You have it right up at the top of your website. That's not doxing they, them. That's not doxing. I didn't do any interviews because I didn't fucking want to. You didn't do any interviews because the recordings don't exist. That's why you didn't do any interviews. And we know that. But more than that, because I don't really care about they, them, Haley. They, them, Haley is going to fade off into obscurity and no one's ever going to hear from they, them again. But now James is using this to try to call for my arrest and deplatforming. James said, "It's really weird how often my crazy stalker gets reported for targeted harassment. Except that I didn't harass no one, James. I showed a public website." Both here, attention, Twitter safety, and on YouTube. I've never gotten so much as a video taken down for harassing anyone, James. I've never gotten a video taken down. I've never gotten a strike. Never gotten a single reprimand from YouTube in the entire time I've been on it. Do you want to know why? Because I'm using public statements to expose things you don't want exposed. They've got to be racking up massive exposure to criminal negligence or worse, plus civil suits by now. It's a lot of people. Well, James, I've never gotten sued, and there's never been any criminal charges or restraining orders or anything like that. Literally none. I've had to get restraining orders on other people. I've had to go file harassment reports on other people. I've absolutely gotten people banned for harassing me. Those are all real things. Ain't never happened to me, though, James. Ain't never happened to me. And I think it's kind of funny that you're pushing for that because I'm making statements that you don't like. I think you responded to someone in the replies, too. Bro, I'm playing for your safety. The fuck? I'm praying for your safety. Let's see. I don't know. He responded to someone earlier, too, saying, oh, shit. Go back. Saying basically that, like, you know, I should be arrested or something. James, here's the thing, bro. Here's the thing. What you're going through right now with people saying a lot of stuff on the internet that you don't like. I went through that every day of my life for 2 fucking years. And the people that did that to me, James, they're the same people that you're friends with now. And you didn't care anything about the amount that I was getting harassed, that I was experiencing exactly the same bullshit that you're experiencing now. So do you know what I say, James? Welcome to the fucking internet, bro. Welcome to the fucking internet. I had to walk through the fire with this situation for years, and now you're getting a teeny tiny taste of the bullshit that I had to endure at the hands of your friends. And by the way, James, while I was enduring the same type of bullshit, for which there is no legal recourse, by the way, because I fucking talked to the police. I fucking talked to the lawyers. Should there be legal recourse for people saying things on the internet that we don't like? I don't know, man. Maybe there should be, but right now there's not. So, this is a situation that you created for yourself. I had to take responsibility for getting myself into this situation, James. I had to take responsibility for that and work through all sorts of fucking emotions. You're going to have to do the same fucking thing. And if you don't like it, get the fuck off the internet. Because you know what? It's not going to change. The fact of the matter is that all I've done, Jimmy, is post public statements that were made publicly. Posting public statements that you don't like or that make you look foolish when you say something foolish, that is not my fucking problem that you don't like it, James. It's not illegal. It's not harassment. You make public statements and you get what you get, bro. And the same is true for they, them, Haley, Shane, and anyone else that might have a problem with it. It is not my fault that they, them put a map on their website of where they are and link that in their public profile. It is not my fault that they, them chose to lie about having secret Antifa recordings for internet clout. It is not my fault that the two of you and all the other people on the internet feel foolish when you get caught with your fucking pants down, in your case literally, James, because your stepdaughter posted publicly that you were in an open marriage before I ever even spoke to her. So Jimmy, call your fucking stepdaughter. Get on the phone, be a man, put on your fucking big boy pants and contact your stepdaughter. And this is, I hope, the last I'm going to say on this topic. Because I quite frankly find it disgusting that James is continuing to drag this out in public and somehow blame me for the fact that his stepdaughter exposed him for forcing his wife to be in an open marriage that she didn't want to be in so he could run around the country and bang all of his groupies at his events. That's not my fault, Jimmy. That's your fucking fault, and you can fix this anytime by picking up the fucking phone, but you are not going to make me responsible for your dirty laundry getting exposed, bro. When your stepdaughter was being harassed by a lot of people and posted all over the internet calling her an OnlyFans whore, I was the one that reached out to her and said, hey, are you okay? This is going to be okay. It's all going to blow over. You should have been the one doing that, and it is not my fault that you refused to do it. All right. That's all I have to say about that. Guys, before we get into the main show, I just want to let people know that we do have some new articles up on my main Substack, which is Carlyn, Karlyn.substack.com. I have been cranking on the content. There's a lot of stuff to cover with the first days of the Trump administration. We've got a lot of new stuff up. I actually recorded a new episode of the Inner Circle podcast, which is my members-only supporter podcast, which you can find, again, over on the Substack. Click on the Inner Circle link at the top. And basically, I found an Antifa planning document. Antifa published a planning document where they were talking about exactly what they're going to do in the face of the Trump administration. And I read the whole thing and I analyzed it on this episode of the Inner Circle podcast. You can find that over on the Substack now. You can also find there were specific sections of that Substack pertaining to what they're going to do about Trump's mass deportation plans or his alleged mass deportation plans. And so they have a whole operational outline for that. I gave you the highlights in this article, how Antifa plans to fight Trump's deportations. That's available on the Substack. And then we've got right here, Trump issued 3 executive orders yesterday that we kind of are interested in. One of them is about gender ideology. One of them is about DEI. One of them is about the censorship of free speech. What do those orders actually do? Well, I read them and I broke them down for you in that article on the Substack. So guys, if you feel like supporting the work I'm doing, if you appreciate that I'm trying to go the extra mile for you guys, breaking down all this stuff, giving you a perspective that very few other people on the internet are giving you in a rational and nuanced way that is not outrage and clickbait and all that bullshit, head over to the Substack, sign up to support my work for $8 a month, $80 a year. I am 100% grassroots funded by you guys, and I can't do it without you. And while you're there, you can access the Counter-Revolutionary Book Club, which we're going to be moving into right now. So the Counter-Revolutionary Book Club, you can find it via the book club link by going to Carlyn, Karlyn.substack.com. That will take you over to the homepage where you can find not only back episodes of the podcast, you can also find the list of documents that we're analyzing for the podcast, so you can read them in advance if you want to, although you certainly don't have to. And there's a full list of about 17 documents we're kind of working our way through. Who knows what happens when we get to the end of that list? We got a long way to go. So you guys can read ahead if you want to. You can wait till I'm going to be reading them. I'm going to be trying to do at least one a week, if not more. You can also subscribe to the podcast where we're reading and analyzing these documents over on Apple Podcasts, also over on Spotify. If you're over there, please give the podcast a 5-star review. I really appreciate it. Today, we are going to be reading a document called Against the Gendered Nightmare. And this is a document that came out in 2014. Let me just pop it into the chat. You guys can read along with me if you want. And I'll give you a little summary of it. If we go back over here. So in the Counter-Revolutionary Book Club link, I have a summary of all of the documents. So this is going to say, Against the Gendered Nightmare by Braden frames gender as an oppressive system rooted in control and power. It argues for dismantling not just traditional gender roles, but the entire concept of gender as a construct. You can find a link to the document over on the Substack. You can also find a PDF download. And we are going to spend the rest of our time reading and analyzing this document. So guys, if you would be so kind, mount the like button for me if you have not already. Please make sure you're subscribed on whatever channel you're watching on. As a reminder, I do my live streams Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time on YouTube, on X, and on Rumble. And I would love for you guys to join me. We also do Socialism Saturday on Saturdays at 6 p.m. And we're going to get this party started because this is a long document. We got a lot to analyze. I want to encourage everyone. If you have questions, put them in the chat. If you have thoughts, put them in the chat. I will also be pausing the playback of the document to offer my thoughts as we make our way through it. And let's get this party started. Maybe the recording will start. Oh no. It's taking its time. Let me refresh. Oh, it's struggling. Let's just give it a second here, hopefully. For some reason it's struggling. You know what I'm going to do? Give me 1 sec. I'm just going to reload it. Give me 1 sec. Take 2. Let's see if we can get the plugin to work this time. It was working earlier. Better work. And let's, okay, we got our voice. All right. Oh, come on. Don't fail me, asshole. Come on. Seriously. It was literally working before the stream, and now it's just not working. Oh my God. We're going to will it to work. Please work. Come on. Do I need to troubleshoot this? It's not even letting me click on it. What the fuck? Hang on. Let's just wait for a second. Let's see if it gets it. We'll give it a second. It was literally working right before this stream. I was testing the... I found a good voice and everything. The website is currently socialist. Seriously. Well, guys, make yourself feel comfortable for a moment. I just want to make sure I want to try to do this. Let's see. Oh, gosh. Did you stop my share? Yes, everyone do a group incantation or something. Okay, we do have a backup if I need one, but I hope I don't need one. Hang on, let me just try to see if I can get the plugin to work without it being shared. It is just bugging out. It is bugging out. All right, let me try this. So we do have another option. Oh, update. That's why it needs to be updated. Man. All right, I do have a backup, so hang on 1 sec. Please forgive me. You can see my entire computer is frozen trying to mitigate this plugin right now. Exit page. The plugin is the problem, sir. Okay, here's what we're going to do. Hang on. I have a backup plan. We are going to get the PDF of this document. And we're going to load the PDF. Into the plugin directly. And we're going to read it here. And we are not going to use my voice. I do actually have an AI voice now, but we're not going to use it. Let's see.
Today, the government announced...
That's a good voice. We'll use this. We'll use this voice. Okay. That's towards the queerest insurrection, though. That wasn't the one I wanted. document. Did I download the wrong document? Hang on. Oh no, all the things are going wrong. Why is everything going wrong? Hang on. We're not going to do it in my AI voice. That would be weird. No? Okay. Go back. Load the correct document. Oh my god. How is this doing this? Document. I really apologize, guys. I did not anticipate the thing crapping out. Library. Braden. There it is. Got it. Winner. All right. Let's get this party started.
Against the Gendered Nightmare. Fragments on Domestication. Leviathan. 2014.
We're not going to go through the whole table of
Contents.
contents. We're not going to go through the whole table of contents.
5-3.
No, we're not doing that. Going down here. So this is a really long document, guys, so we might not get through
several years.
We might not get through the whole thing today, just so people know. We're going to do maybe a part 1 or 2 or possibly even a part 3. All right. Now we're finally there. Can I zoom in at all and show people this at a little bit? Zoom in. I would like to go a little bit bigger to give people the best view of the text that we can. Not perfect, but not perfect. Oh, shoot. How about we do fit? Thank you guys for bearing with me. Just trying to make this nicer for everyone. No, go back. There we go. That's weird. All right, that'll have to be good enough. Let's get this party started.
In the past several years, the question of gender has been taken up again and again by the anarchist milieu. And still few attempts amount to much more than a rehashing of old ideas. Most positions on gender remain within the constraints of one or more of the ideologies that have failed us already, mainly Marxist feminism, a watered-down ecofeminism, or some sort of liberal queer anarchism. Present in all of these are the same problems we've howled against already: identity politics, representation, gender essentialism, reformism, and reproductive futurism.
Okay, so this is actually a long list of problems, and I want to make it clear. We are talking, this document is written by queer Marxists, okay? These are queer anarcho-capitalists. Let's just listen again to all of the problems that the queer anarcho-capitalists say that we have.
Present in all of these are the same problems we've howled against already: identity politics, representation, gender essentialism, reformism, and reproductive futurism.
So they consider identity politics to be a problem. They consider gender essentialism to be a problem. They consider reformism, which is basically like the Democratic Socialists of America. They believe that's a problem. Okay? These are things that they don't like. This was published in 2014, but it is very influential on today's gender and queer activists.
While we have no interest in offering another ideology in this discourse, we imagine that an escape route could be charted by asking the question that few will ask, by setting a course straight to the secret center of gendered life, which all the ideological answers take for granted. We are speaking, of course, about civilization itself. Such a path of inquiry is not one easily traveled. At every step of the way, stories are obscured and falsified by credentialed deceivers and revolutionary careerists. Those ideas presented as science are separated from myth only in that their authors claim to abolish mythology, anthropology, psychoanalysis, history, economics, Each faces us as another edifice built to hide a vital secret. At every step, we find more questions than answers, and yet this shadowy journey feels all the more necessary at the present moment. At the same time as technological civilization is undergoing a renewed assault on the very experience of living beings, the horrors of gendered life continue to be inextricable from that assault.
The horrors of gendered life. So when they're talking about that, they mean the horrors that capitalism created when it created the gender binary of men and women.
Rape, imprisonment, bashings, separations, dysmorphia, displacement, the labors of sexuality, and all the anxieties of techniques of the self. These daily miseries and plagues are only outpaced by the false solutions which strive to foreclose any possibility of escape. Queer economies, cybernetic communities, legal reforms, prescription drugs, abstraction, academia, the utopias of activist soothsayers, and the diffusion of countless subcultures and niche identities, so many apparatuses of capture. The first issue of Baden features a rather involved exegesis of Lee Edelman's book No Future. In it, we attempted to read Edelman against himself, to elaborate his critique of progress and futurity outside of its academic trappings and beyond the limitations of its form. To do so, we explored the traditions of queer revolt to which Edelman's theory is indebted, particularly the thought of Guy Hockingham. Exploring Hockingham still proves particularly exciting, because his writing represents some of the earliest queer theory which explicitly rejects civilization, as well as the families, economies, metaphysics.
I'm sorry, what? His writings represent some of the earliest queer theories which explicitly reject civilization, as well as the families, economies, metaphysics, sexualities, and gender which compose it, while imagining a queer desire which is civilization's undoing. I think this is the first time where we've actually heard queer anarchists call for the abolition of civilization. That seems a bit extreme.
Exploring Hockingham still proves particularly exciting, because his writing represents some of the earliest queer theory which explicitly rejects civilization, as well as the families, economies, metaphysics, sexualities and genders which compose it, while also imagining a queer desire which is civilization's undoing. That exploration lead us to explore the bodily and spiritual underpinnings of civilization, domestication, or the process of the victory of our fathers over our lives, the way in which the social order laid down by the dead continues to haunt the living. The residue of accumulated memories, culture and relationships which have been transmitted to us through the linear progression of time and the fantasy of the child. This investment of the horrors of the past into our present lives which ensures the perpetuation of civilization. Our present inquiry begins here. To explore the conflict of the wildness of queer desire against domestication is to take aim at an enemy who confronts us from the beginning of time itself. While our efforts in the first issue of this journal,
domestication might be the same as like assimilation.
While our efforts in the first issue of this journal were a refusal of the teleology which situated an end to gender at the conclusion of a linear progression of time, we'll now address the questions of origins which hint toward an outside at the other end of this line.
Okay, so they're literally saying here, which situated an end to gender at the conclusion of a linear progression of time. So they're saying that gender is going to end at some point.
As we've denied ourselves the future, we now turn against the past. In this, we abandon any pretensions of certainty or claims to truth. Instead we have 3. Only the experiences of those who revolt against the gendered existent, as well as the stories of those whose revolt we've inherited. In the spirit of this revolt, we offer these fragments against gender and domestication. Domestication, the integration of living beings into the civilized order, must also be the integration of life into the dualism and separation which we experience as gender. The concept is thrown about in a variety of contexts and under various names, and yet very few have attempted to thoroughly define it. It is used colloquially to discuss the vast gulf which exists between wild creatures and those tamed and clawless ones whose existence has been reduced to economic necessities. It is linguistically tied to the realm of the domestic, and by extension to the economic through the management of the home, oikonomia. It is the violence implied in the concept of primitive accumulation.
Primitive accumulation. So that's going to be a reference to private property, I think.
It is the violence implied in the concept of primitive accumulation, the first tearing of a being away from itself, and its subsequent imprisonment in class society.
Yep.
It is further
property.
implied in all the theories of subjectification, the construction of all the identities and roles which populate the social order. Being so central to the world we inhabit and the subjects we have become, the concept warrants a more precise and consistent definition.
Well, do tell.
In our previous engagement with domestication, we primarily looked at the writings of Jacques Camat. He comes to his theory of domestication through an exploration of the ways that capital empties, transforms and colonizes human beings. In his words, capital's anthropomorphism. Capital dissect.
Okay, so this is important. What they're saying here is that capitalism is not just an economic system. Capitalism dictates a certain social order, and in dictating that social order, capitalism transforms and colonizes human beings. Does everyone understand what that means? It's saying that we have internalized capitalism as part of the virtue of being brought up in a capitalist society. Capitalism has imposed itself on us, not just as an economic system, not just as a social order, but capitalism has actually taken hold of us as human beings at the core of our entity.
He comes to his theory of domestication through an exploration of the ways that capital empties, transforms and colonizes human beings. In his words, capital's anthropomorphism. Capital dissects and analyzes the human being, ruptures the mind from the body, and reconstructs the human as a willful subject of the social order. The consequence of this rupturing and suturing of life is the recuperation of the vast range of humanist means of resistance. Community.
Yeah, so like Andre in the chat is saying this is capitalism as a virus. I think that's a really good way to think about it. They're talking about capitalism being this thing that comes in that is foreign to us. It's a foreign entity, and it comes in and it takes us over at our core. They're talking about it like it's Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Invasion of the Body Snatchers, if you guys have never seen that movie, you got to watch the Donald Sutherland one, of course. Like, that's actually a really good analogy to how they feel capitalism imposes itself on us and takes over our body.
The consequence of this rupturing and suturing of life is the recuperation of the vast range of humanist means of resistance. Communities become communities of capital, and individuals become little more than consumers. Separation evolves into an image of wholeness which replaces the unity it abolished. Domestication, which limits the possibilities of what we can become, promises a future without limits, because it ties our future to an undead and all-devouring system. We are evacuated of our desires and instincts, and the vacuous space left within us is filled with all the representations of what was taken. Instead of a vast multitude of potentials and ways of relating to the world, our lives are reduced to a microcosm of the linear progression of society. Domestication does more than enslave us to the social order's future, it creates willful slaves. As individual living beings are reduced to spectators and functions of dead things, the non-living itself becomes autonomous. All the scientific disciplines.
They're saying that capitalism reduces us to being NPCs, like we're not even fully functioning entities because we've been so taken over by this external thing.
All the scientific disciplines, the linguists of this autonomous non-living thing, proclaim alongside the fascists, "Long live death." These disciples of capital use their methodology to prove that this is the way things...
Whoa! They just called the fascists the disciples of capital. Did you guys catch that? All the scientific disciplines, excuse me, all of the scientific disciplines, the linguists of this autonomous, non-living thing proclaim alongside the fascists, long live death. These disciples of capital use their methodology to prove that this is the way things always were. They naturalize capital and demonstrate its inevitability. Ha! That's disciples of capital. That's a t-shirt right there.
All the scientific disciplines, the linguists of this autonomous non-living thing, proclaim alongside the fascists, long live death. These disciples of capital use their methodology to prove that this is the way things always were. They naturalize capital and demonstrate its inevitability. We are split and dominated in the same way as physicists split and dominate the atom, managed in the same way cyberneticians manage their networks and feedback loops. As above, so below. Thus for Kamat, capital conquers our imagination both with regard to our future and also our past. Capital has reduced nature and human beings to a state of domestication. The imagination and the libido have been enclosed as surely as the forests, oceans, and common lands. The process of domestication is sometimes brought about violently, as happens with primitive accumulation. More often it proceeds insidiously because revolutionaries. 4. Continue to think.
Wait. This is actually a really good point. Adrian says, as above, so below. That's a hierarchy. I'm going to be thinking about that one, Adrian. Thank you.
Continue to think according to assumptions which are implicit in capital and the development of productive forces, and all of them share in exalting the one divinity, science. Hence domestication and repressive consciousness have left our minds fossilized more or less to the point of senility. Our actions have become rigidified and our thoughts stereotyped. We have been the soulless frozen masses fixated on the post, believing all the time that we were gazing ahead into the future. This moment of Kamat's thought is interesting because it marks his personal shift away from Marxism and toward a critique of civilization.
Oh!
Unfortunately, though, it is precisely its situation in that shift which creates the limit of his definition of domestication. For him, the autonomous non-life which domesticates life is capital, and he situates this process in a specific moment of capitalism where capital escapes and forms its own community. This is tied up in his esoteric reading of Marx. He locates domestication at the point at which capitalism has developed into a representation and is thrown into crisis. He calls capital an endpoint of the processes of democratization, individuation, and massification.
Wait. He calls capital an endpoint of the processes of democratization, individuation, and massification. I'm not entirely sure I understand what he means by each of those terms, but let's just keep that in mind as we proceed.
He speaks of these processes as presuppositions to capital which may go as far back as the Greek polis and its representational break of humans from the rest of wildlife, and to the domination of men over women. And so if we can locate capital at the endpoint,
The domination of men over women is the patriarchy. Remember, they believe that capitalism created the gender binary, which is men and women. It put men in the workplace where they had access to all the power and all the money. It put women in the home doing the unpaid labor of raising the next generation of proletarian workers. That means in the hierarchy of gender, men are on the top of the hierarchy, women are on the bottom of the hierarchy. That's what they mean when they say the domination of men over women. That's what we call the patriarchy.
And so if we can locate capital at the endpoint of this ancient chain of separations, how can domestication begin with capital? Moreover, if gendered domination predates domestication by millennia, How can his version of domestication account for the separation and colonization of life, for which gender is a euphemism? His origin myth fails at the point where it begins. His story is not enough for us, because we know this colonization of our very existence did not begin in the last century, or even the one before
When did it start?
We can still hear the distant cries of those who've resisted since long before. Clearly, we must leave Kamat behind if we want to comprehend domestication in its totality.
Okay.
2. Kamat's critique of domestication is most clearly articulated in his essay The Wandering of Humanity, which was first published in English in 1975 by Black and Red of Detroit. At the time, the press was run by Lorraine Perlman and her husband Freddie. They self-published the text in a beautiful pamphlet after Freddie completed its first English translation. In reading Perlman's own writing, the influence of the text is readily apparent.
You know, this is just a side note, but I've been thinking a lot about how one of the reasons that the left is so effective is they embraced the idea of self-publishing like a long time ago. They didn't, I mean, maybe I guess if they could get their book mass produced through like a large publisher, they did it. But like they all had these presses. I mean, we've heard about this in the zine culture where like all these people just had like independent printing presses and they were all printing each other's stuff and making sure that they could distribute it. And it was very kind of like a DIY thing. And it was always about making sure they were reaching out to people in their communities in the real world. And just think about that for a second, because it's kind of, I feel like even now self-publishing is so readily available, and it's so much better than going through a traditional publisher, by the way. And I say that as someone who's published 2 books with traditional publishers. Like, even now, it's like people look down on self-publishing because they're like, oh, you couldn't get a book deal. But it's like, you're able to operate much more quickly. You're able to get out more precise messaging because you're not having to be marketed by like a corporate entity. With Amazon, it honestly doesn't even matter if you go through a real publisher, because part of the virtue of a real publisher was getting into quote unquote real bookstores or whatever. But everyone buys their books through Amazon now, and anyone can sell books on Amazon. And it's like one of those things where they embraced this like DIY kind of like really scrappy underdog thing, and look how effective they are with it. They publish way more books than the right does. Their stuff is, there are literally entire bookstores dedicated to just this stuff. And it's like, it's one of those things where, why weren't we more effectively just taking their tactics and utilizing them for ourselves? Bobby, I literally have a literary agent, and no, that's not true. So, like, relax, bro. I know what I'm talking about in this regard. I've had a literary agent. I've had a speaking agent. I seem to think it is. But please, let's focus our questions and our comments on the book and things related to the book that we're looking at. Do you happen to know if he just calls? Well, I'm not. Okay, so I'm not exactly sure how to answer that question, so we're just going to go past it because I don't know actually what you're referencing. So let's continue, guys. Please focus questions on what is on the book. As a reminder, this is a live recording for a podcast, so if people are bringing in questions that are not directly related to what's in the book, that's going to be really distracting for me, and it's going to be really distracting for people who are listening to the podcast later. So please be focused.
In reading Perlman's own writing, the influence of the text is readily apparent. Perlman himself would go on to incorporate these ideas into a scathing critique of civilization, which still inspires much of the anti-civilization perspective within the anarchist milieu. His efforts would largely be motivated by seizing upon the precise limit we've identified in Kamat's story, that of origins. In her biography of Freddie, Having Little, Being Much, Lorraine narrates the way that he spent the following 7 years almost single-mindedly focused on exploring the history of the domesticating monster. In particular, he spent those years tearing through accounts of the European colonization of the North America and the domestication process which they unleashed upon all of the living inhabitants of this continent. He stole from Hobbes in naming this monster Leviathan, and undertook the monumental task of telling the tale of those who've resisted it. He self-published his findings in 1983 in a wonderful and tragic book, released among friends. 5. At a party at his and Lorraine's house in Detroit. The book was titled Against His Story, Against Leviathan, asserting that resistance is the only human component of the entire his story. Freddie suspended his in-depth study of resistance to Leviathanic incursions in the woodlands around the Great Lakes to examine the barbarians and untamed tribes who, in earlier times, unequivocally refused the bondage of civilization. Where his story exalts in civic and military achievements, calling them progress, Freddie's story views each consolidation of state power as an encroachment on the human community. He addresses the reader as one individual speaking to another, and makes no claim to follow scholarly rules. I take it for granted that resistance is the natural human response to dehumanization and, therefore, does not have to be explained or justified. The resistance story.
Yeah, this is actually a good point. So for people who might be listening to the podcast, when they said earlier where history exalts in civic and military achievements, calling them progress, they spelled it HISSTORY, his story. So that's also a commentary on saying that history is written by the men who are in power, and so it's going to be inherently oppressive of women.
He addresses the reader as one individual speaking to another, and makes no claim to follow scholarly rules. I take it for granted that resistance is the natural human response to dehumanization and, therefore, does not have to be explained or justified. The resistance story follows the chronology of Leviathan's destructive march, but avoids using historians' conventions of dating the events. This, as well as the poetic visionary language, gives the work an epic quality. Freddie begins his narrative by attempting to isolate the way that other available ideological positions fail to grasp the enemy in its fullness. His method is instructive in that he points to how each ideology is too narrow and can only offer incredibly superficial solutions to the problem of domestication. In the first chapter, he writes, Marxists point at the capitalist mode of production, sometimes only at the capitalist class. Anarchists point at the state. Kamat points at capital. New ranters point at technology or civilization or both. The Marxists see only the mote in the enemy's eye. They supplant their villain with a hero, the anti-capitalist mode of production, the revolutionary establishment. They fail to see that their hero is the very same shape with lion body and the head of a man, a gaze blank and pitiless as the sun. They fail to see that the anti-capitalist mode of production wants only to outrun its brother in wrecking the biosphere. Anarchists are as varied as mankind. There are governmental and commercial anarchists as well as a few for hire. Some anarchists differ from Marxists only in being less informed. They would supplant the state with a network of computer centers, factories and mines coordinated by the workers themselves or by an anarchist union. They would not call this arrangement a state. The name change would exorcise the beast. Kamat, the new ranters and Turner treat the villains of the Marxists and anarchists as mere attributes of the real protagonist. Kamat gives the monster a body. He names the monster capital, borrowing the term from Marx but giving it a new content. He promises to describe the monster's origin and trajectory but has not yet done so. The problems that he draws out about anarchist and Marxist politics resonate as much today as they did in 1983, and those who've drawn other conclusions largely have Freddie to thank for helping to rejuvenate an anarchy without an attachment to industrialism.
Hey, I gotta pause it real quick for a super chat. Elena, thank you for the super chat. I'm about 20 minutes behind. This is crazy as hell. We got a long way to go, Elena. I think this is going to get even crazier, but I hope you guys are enjoying it so far. The writing is a little bit flowery, a little academic, and I think we just need to listen because they're kind of still in the introductory phases of it right now. So hang in there and let's just see where this is going.
The problems that he draws out about anarchist and Marxist politics resonate as much today as they did in 1983, and those who've drawn other conclusions largely have Freddie to thank for helping to rejuvenate an anarchy without an attachment to industrialism. technology, or other fetishes of production. It is
Fetishes
from
of
this
production,
last point,
fetishes.
the failure of Kamat to sketch the origin and trajectory of the monster, that he sketches his own. He draws on the writings of Frederick Turner to articulate the spirit of the monster, but criticizes Turner for his inability to speak of the monster's body, the cadaverous body which tears apart wild things and incorporates them into itself. Freddy's narrative strikes out against this body. Freddy's project is an important one, because it pushes the critique of domestication beyond the comfortable answers. He interrogates the beast's machinations before late capitalism, before the colonization of the New World, before the rise of capitalism itself. What he accomplished was to write a story about the rise of every civilization since the first in Sumeria, and thus also of civilization itself. Significantly, he told this
Oh,
tale while
no.
indicting the historians, anthropologists, and economists who justify the rise of Leviathan. Instead, he told the story from the perspective of those who resisted domestication at every juncture. This is one of the many stylistic and ethical reasons that make the book so genuinely beautiful to read. Whereas I can't in good faith recommend that one reads the tedious works of Edelman or Kamat, I'd happily gift against his story to any of my
His
dearest friends.
story.
This is also the reason that it doesn't make a great deal of sense to attempt a comprehensive paraphrasing. Trying to capture the magic of Freddy's storytelling would be difficult, if not impossible. Rather, I'd suggest that anyone who wants to experience the depth and weight of the book's critique should simply read it themselves. That being said, we'll identify a few themes within the story which will help us in our own.
Oh, good.
These understandings will be useful in moving further with an exploration of domestication. In no particular order, some useful themes about domestication which emerge through the text. The language of the domesticated always serves to hide widely accepted lies, if barely. Clearly only those outside of the monster are free, and yet the civilized will
Hang on, let's
use
just
this.
pause on that. Let's just pause on that. The language of the domesticated always serves to hide widely accepted lies, if barely. So what does that mean? They think that language is a tool to be used in order to like hide lies or to expose things. So in this case, I'm betting the lie is going to be something like, you're not oppressed, you're a free person, all this stuff, whereas they're saying that's trying to hide the lie that we are all inherently, to a person level, oppressed by capitalism.
The language of the domesticated always serves to hide widely accepted lies, if barely. Clearly only those outside of the monster are free, and yet the civilized will use this word to describe themselves.
See?
Even the dictionary contains this contradiction. It describes freedom as belonging to citizens, yet then says that something is free if not constrained by anything other than its own being. There isn't any way to reconcile this contradiction.
So they're literally saying that we can never be free because we are internally oppressed by capitalism.
Even the dictionary can wild birds and trees and insects which are only determined by their own potential and wishes are free. Citizens are constrained by an infinity of unfreedom. The
Unfreedom.
domesticated will refer to those humans who are still free as barbarians or savages, and yet these terms designate those very people as legitimate prey for the most barbaric atrocities at the hands of the civilized. This meaninglessness and deception inherent to language is true of almost every word that the domesticated will use to describe themselves. That which destroys communities is named a community, that which has a thirst for human blood beyond any reason is called humanism and reason. This is important when faced with the writings of those who aim, through words, to justify domestication.
I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name. Rufro is. I don't know how to pronounce your name. But he in the chat says, is that really a contradiction? So let's go back. The language of domestication always serves to hide widely accepted lies, if barely. what they're saying the contradiction is, even the dictionary contains the contradiction. It describes freedom as belonging to citizens, that yet then says something is free if it's not constrained by anything other than their own being. What it's saying is, you have to, okay, so again, your challenge, the challenge that we keep having with you, is that you don't listen to things that are previously said. So the definition of capitalism that they've given already in this article is one that is not just an economic system, not just a social system, but something that is internally oppressive to our soul, okay? So what they're saying is, you can never be free as long as capitalism exists. The dictionary is describing freedom as belonging to citizens, but we belong to a capitalist state, and therefore we can never be free. So it is a contradiction from their perspective, given the point they're trying to make. And remember, what the truth is does not matter for this exercise. We are not debunking the libs. We don't do that here. Only losers and retards spend time debunking and owning the libs. Our point of view is to listen to something from their perspective, and from their perspective, it is a contradiction. Adrian says capitalism, freedom is something to be owned. Owning is oppressive. That's the contradiction. I don't see it saying freedom is something to be owned. I don't see them saying that in the book anywhere, so that I'm not sure about. I swear, Vince says, I swear this sounds like one wizard saying that his spell is more powerful than the other because of the words he used. It is a little bit like that, isn't it? Yep, Alex says hierarchy is the antithesis of freedom in their eyes. Yep.
Leviathan takes the form of artificial life. It has no life of its own, and thus can only function by capturing living beings within itself. Following Hobbes, Leviathan is an artificial man. A blonde, masculine, crowned man bearing a sword and a scepter. This artificial man is composed of countless faceless human beings.
Hang on. Blaz over on Twitter says, if nihilism was a book, this would be it. Well, it's funny that you say that, because there is actually a document called Gender Nihilism. There's also a document called Beyond Gender Nihilism, and we're going to be reading those documents coming up in the Counter-Revolutionary Book Club. I think after this, and this could conceivably take up to like 5 parts. This is a really long document. After we do this one, we're going to do the Gender Accelerationist Manifesto, which is crazy. I've read and analyzed that one before. It's nuts. And then after that, we've got Gender Nihilism and Beyond Gender Nihilism. So subscribe to the Counter-Revolutionary Book Club. We got a lot of crazy shit coming up.
Leviathan takes the form of artificial life. It has no life of its own, and thus can only function by capturing living beings within itself. Following Hobbes, Leviathan is an artificial man. A blonde, masculine, crowned man bearing a sword and a scepter.
Adrian Dittman,
this
basically.
artificial man is composed of countless faceless human beings, tasked with moving the springs and wheels and levers which make the artificial beast move. Hobbes, in turn, would see these individual human beings as nothing more than a composite of strings and wheels and springs. Freddy imagines that the beast might not be an artificial human but rather a giant worm, not a living worm but a carcass of a worm, a monstrous cadaver, its body consisting of numerous segments, its skin pimpled with spears and wheels and 7. Other technological implements. He knows from his own experience that the entire carcass is brought to artificial life by the motions of the human beings trapped inside, who operate the springs and wheel. Human beings regress while the worm progresses. The worm's greatest accomplishment is to remake the people within it into individual mechanized unit. These human machines are ultimately replaced by entirely automated machines, more amenable to existence within the labor camps of Leviathan. This is a haunting proposition because it implicates us as complicit in the machinery of our own nightmare, both as the living force which animates the monster, but also as having internalized that animation. Leviathan constitutes itself through institutions of domestication. These institutions are impersonal and immortal. Immortality is found among no living creature on the earth. In being immortal, these institutions are a part of death, and death cannot die. Workers, prisoners and soldiers die, and yet factories, prisons and armies live on. As civilization grows, the domain of death grows while the individuals living within
Factories, prisons, and armies live on. Factories, prisons, and armies are all functions of capitalism, and it's saying workers, prisoners, and soldiers die. That's the proletariat, okay? Everyone understand that?
As civilization grows, the domain of death grows while the individuals living within it die. No resistance movement has yet been able to deal with this contradiction. Monasteries were an early innovation in these immortal institutions. In these establishments, which are nothing but early schools, human beings are systematically broken, the way horses or oxen are broken, to bear weights and pull loads. They are separated from their own humanity, from all.
Human beings are systematically broken by capitalism in the same way that horses and oxen are broken to bear weight and pull loads. They're literally saying that human beings are nothing but beasts of burden under capitalism. And now it's going to say they're separated from their own humanity. Capitalism does all of that.
They are separated from their own humanity, from all natural activities and sequences, and taught to perform artificial activities and identify with Leviathanic sequences. They become disciplined springs and wheels engaged in a routine that has no relation to human desires or natural cycles. The clock will be invented by monastic beings because the clock is nothing but a miniature monastery whose springs and wheels are made of metal instead of flesh and blood. No amount of institutional reform has exorcised this monstrous aspect of institutions.
So do you guys remember in the Museum of African American History when they had the aspects of a white supremacy culture document? One of the aspects that they talk about is time. Time is a function of white supremacy. And they say if you are being on time, that makes you a white supremacist. And that was one of the most crazy things about that. That confused a lot of people. Well, why is that? You say black people can't be on time? Well, it starts to make more sense when you understand that to the left, white supremacy is not about skin color at all. White supremacy is about the things that uphold capitalism, the things that uphold productivity, the things that uphold the machine that is oppressing all of us according to the left. So they're saying here, the clock will be invented by monastic beings because the clock is nothing but a miniature monastery whose springs and wheels are made of metal instead of flesh and blood. No amount of institutional reform has excised this monstrous aspect of institutions.
Domesticated humans are defined by their adornment with masks over their faces and armor over their bodies. These masks and armors are the ways in which the individual internalizes the constraint of Leviathan and acclimates themselves to life within it. These are necessary for surviving the everyday domination and humiliation which is life in this society. They protect individuals from their own emotions, perception and estrangement from being. The armor wraps around the individual and invades their body just as all ecstatic life and freedom is evacuated from the body, save for a potential. All that's left is the armor. This can also be understood as the formation of civilized identities. Domestication is perpetuated through a civilized spirituality which emphasizes dominion over all living things,
The hierarchy.
but more importantly,
Hierarchy.
self-management and self-domination. All monotheistic religions hold in common that man must have dominion over the fish and fowl and all living things. The Catholic Church in particular has enforced this decree by declaring war against all living things, the same living things which constitute the autonomy and independence of free people. The Church innovated upon this doctrine through the concept of sin. In response to sin, people are compelled to do to themselves.
Yeah, so MacB is saying in the chat, so being a civilized person is the result of capitalism. Yeah, that's effectively what they're saying. When they're saying domestication, they mean that you have been domesticated by capitalism. They're kind of playing with language in that way. But yeah, if you are a civilized person, being civilized is being part of a normative culture. It's being part of, polite society and that sort of thing. That polite society is built on capitalism.
The Church innovated upon this doctrine through the concept of sin. In response to sin, people are compelled to do to themselves what God does to all living things and what the nobles do to the peasant. They turn violence against their own urges and desires, above all the desire for freedom and escape. The war against all life continues as a war against oneself. No previous Leviathan had so thoroughly degraded its human content. Not only do humans domesticated into the Christian civilization suffer, they suffer a self-inflicted violence at their own hands and from their own mind. They enforce a slow tortuous murder upon themselves. This war on the self would be externalized as the holy war which the Church would later wage against infidels, both domestic and abroad. Such conquest is democratized through the decree that every man should be an emperor in his own home. Peasants and nobility alike are joined in this frenzy of violence and control over their subjects. At this point, even the most secular civilized society has been entrenched in this self-constraint for so many generations that such a spiritual form of domination appears also as secular and natural. While some leviathans could be seen as worms, others appear more as octopuses carrying out a pillaging of the earth more intense and widespread than ever before. This expansion is necessary to Leviathan's survival, but no living being willfully submits to accumulation into these monsters. Economists and historians will describe a natural material dialectic by which people willfully enter these beasts, because of their supposedly superior amenities. And yet at every turn, violence must be used to force people to accept these amenities. There is no demand, until people have been broken from the wild world and from their own abilities to care for themselves. European clothes are only worn by those who have lost their own. These communities of free peoples are attacked by an unprecedented chemical and biological warfare which exists nowhere outside of civilization itself. All that exists outside of civilization is viewed as raw materials to be accumulated. This outside is often constructed through a racialized and gendered category.
Oh, there it is. This outside is often constructed through a racialized and gendered categories. Now we're starting to get into it.
This accumulation does not happen at the hands of economists, but by lynch mobs, militaries, armies, and all the rest of Leviathan's police. The genocide carried out by Europeans against native peoples and animals and land bases on the American continents amounts to the most unprecedented of these accumulations. Through the activity of grave diggers, even the dead become commodities. All of this violence is necessary for Leviathan's growth. The dead commodities become the seeds of the next wave of accumulation. Those whose communities have long since been defeated will carry...
Accumulation is going to be private property accumulation, by the way, so that's a reference to capitalism. Like you're accumulating stuff, you're accumulating wealth, you're accumulating resources.
Those whose communities have long since been defeated will carry the banner of their lost community in an attempt to regain that lost freedom.
The Leviathan is referring to like the capitalist order, I think. I think they're being artful in how they're talking about capitalism. Like the Leviathan is the monster. The Leviathan is like the mechanized man that's in the machine.
Those whose communities have long since been defeated will carry the banner of their lost community in an attempt to regain that lost freedom by battling an imagined enemy. The civilized humans wear the mask of something they no longer are or never were, all in an attempt to
I'll say this too. You guys got to keep in mind, the left writes in flowery language. This is just how they write. They are artful in their prose. So the Leviathan in this case is referencing the capitalist monster that they were talking about earlier.
The civilized humans were the mask of something they no longer are or never were, all in an attempt to hide what they've become. It amounts to a frenzy.
So the civilized humans wear the mask of something they no longer are or never were, all in an attempt to hide what they've become. The civilized humans are the humans that have been colonized by capitalism. They've been taken over by capitalism. They are outside of their natural state. They're wearing a mask to fit into the capitalist order, but they aren't really how they're presenting because capitalism is forcing them to present in a certain way. So that's how we should be thinking about this stuff. Yes, Bot says capitalism took their humanity. Yeah, it kind of said that earlier, didn't it? It said capitalism basically wants to make all of us to be like NPCs.
The civilized humans were the mask of something they no longer are or never were, all in an attempt to hide what they've become. It amounts to a frenzied rush away from oneself. Christianity, the Reformation, Marxism and Nazism are but a few examples of movements which begin by projecting an image of rejecting the industrial hell, but in fact only reproduce industrial civilization. In fact, most new Leviathans begin as resistance movements. By undergoing what will be called industrial and technological revolutions, the great artifice breaches all walls, storms victoriously through every natural and human barrier, increasing its velocity at every turn. But by the time the beast really gets going like a winged rodent out of Inferno, its own soothsayers will be saying an object which approaches the speed of light loses its body.
Bot says, he said Marxism reproduces industrial civilization. Yes, he did. Yes, he did. He said Christianity, the Reformation, Marxism, and Nazism are but a few examples of movements which begin by projecting an image of rejecting the industrial hell, but in fact only reproduce industrial civilization. Exactly. I don't think he's saying that Marxism isn't anti-capitalism enough. That's not what I'm getting from this, Adrian, but I could be wrong. Let's continue to listen.
By undergoing what will be called industrial and technological revolutions, the great artifice breaches all walls, storms victoriously through every natural and human barrier, increasing its velocity at every turn. But by the time the beast really gets going like a winged rodent out of Inferno, its own soothsayers will be saying an object which approaches the speed of light loses its body and turns to smoke. Such objects' victories are, in the long run, Pyrrhic.
Guys, you have to be careful. This is perhaps the point I was trying to make with the flowery language comment earlier. You have to be careful with how you interpret things that are written like this, because there are things that are written in this document that are not intended to be translated literally. It's an allegory. Sometimes. Sometimes it is meant to be translated literally, but you have to be careful at how you're interpreting this, is I guess what I'm saying, because right now I'm seeing a lot of people in the chat who are quite frankly asking questions that are not relevant to what's being said, and I think that part of the reason is you're having trouble interpreting the language of what's being said because it's not necessarily a literal interpretation, and it's not intended to be a literal interpretation, and we're not going to interpret it in a way that I don't think it was intended to own the libs or do whatever people typically do. I'm not suggesting anyone's trying to do that. I'm just saying that we have to be careful with how we're looking at this information.
Such objects' victories are, in the long run, Pyrrhic. Civilization is marked by overextension, rapid growth, and a movement toward infinity. This movement is ultimately self-destructive, producing contradictions and breakdowns which threaten the machine itself. All of history is littered with the carnage and wreckage of this hubris. This is a complex point about decomposition which warrants more attention. We will return to it later. 9. These points barely scratch the surface of eloquent argumentation in Against His Story, Against Leviathan, but they are worth drawing out because they help us to understand and elucidate a functioning definition of domestication beginning with the first civilizations. Deception, capture, domination, accumulation, annihilation, decline, We will see these themes repeating in all the stories which follow our inquiry. 3. In the years since Freddie published against his story, Against Leviathan, the topic of domestication has been taken up by a whole range of anti-civilization anarchists and projects. In most of the writings emerging from this milieu, domestication is nearly tautological with civilization. This tautology is instructive, as it points to the autonomous existence of a monster which has the sole purpose of perpetuating.
Hang on. Yes, we know Leviathan was written by Hobbes because they mentioned it earlier, but I don't think that's how they're using the language in this particular regard. I think they've adapted it.
This tautology is instructive, as it points to the autonomous existence of a monster which has the sole purpose of perpetuating itself by bringing all life inside. Freddie would call such a monster a world destroyer. While different tendencies of anti-civilization thought tend to understand domestication from different angles, it remains central to the thought and practice of those who believe civilization must be destroyed. Contemporary anti-civilization writers have elaborated the critique of domestication into daily life, indicting countless small operations which serve to domesticate life. Domestication is the process that civilization uses to indoctrinate and control life according to its logic. These time-tested mechanisms of subordination include taming, breeding, genetically modifying, schooling, caging, intimidating, coercing, extorting, promising, governing, enslaving, terrorizing, murdering. The list goes on to include almost every civilized social interaction. Their movement and effects can be examined and felt throughout society, enforced through various institutions, rituals, and customs. Others have devoted their...
Yeah, I just want to do a quick pause. Thank you, Dragon Balls, for the super sticker in the chat. I do appreciate it. Thanks so much for your support. So they're saying domestication is the process that uses civilization to indoctrinate and control us. So again, this is saying that domestication is that point in which we internalize capitalism into our being. Capitalism colonizes us as a human being. And that's why it's used to indoctrinate and control life according to its logic. And then they say, here are all the horrible things that capitalism does and all the ways we participate in this. And then we keep going.
Others have devoted their explorations to the conditions and events which lead to the establishment of agriculture and symbolic thought 10,000 years ago, trying to force the far past to give up its secrets. From this perspective, that originary moment of domestication inaugurated millennia of war, slavery, ecological destruction, and the annihilation of free creatures. All of these elaborations are useful in that they explain what domestication means in various...
Hang on. From this perspective, the ordinary moment of domestication inaugurated a millennia of war, slavery, ecological destruction, and the annihilation of free creatures. So what are they saying there? What are they saying happened? How do people interpret that? From this perspective, that ordinary moment of domestication inaugurated a millennia of war, slavery, ecological destruction, and the annihilation of free creatures. I want to make sure people are following this, because if you've been following what the book is saying, then you should be able to explain to me what that means. So I'm looking in the chat. From this perspective, the ordinary moment of domestication inaugurated a millennia of war, slavery, ecological destruction, and the annihilation of free creatures. Capitalism is responsible for all of these things. Yes, because we know that domestication means capitalism colonizing us as human beings. We know that they believe capitalism is responsible for all problems in the world, all war, all slavery, all ecological destruction. And they already told us earlier that we are not free people under capitalism. So they're saying capitalism destroyed all free people in the world. Does everyone understand this? We went from being free to being slaves under capitalism. Yup, Adrian got that. Capitalism is responsible for all these problems. No. Well, Alexis is saying we are the free creatures, right? No, we're not. They're explicitly saying that we are not free creatures under capitalism. They said that earlier. This is why listening is really important, guys. This is why I tell people do not shitpost in the chat. Do not chat in things that are not relevant to what we're talking about, because we need to listen to what's being said. Domestication is when the person first becomes oppressed by capitalism. When they're talking about domestication, they're not talking about animals, they're talking about us. They've already told us that the Bible and monotheistic religions say that there is a hierarchy of men over animals. These people don't believe in hierarchy. So they're not talking about animals being domesticated, they're talking about human beings being domesticated by capitalism. We are the animals. When they're saying free creatures, Alex, they're not talking about animals, they're talking about human beings. Does everyone understand? Guys, you've really got to, if you have, the reason that I'm doing these live recordings of the book club instead of just pre-recording it on my own is I want people to ask questions. But I want you to ask questions that are relevant to the text, not things that are out of left field or not a question that you've been dying to ask me for 3 weeks and you just got around to it because you just thought of it. Like, write that question down and ask it another time. I want you asking questions about this. We've got to be listening, and if you don't understand what you're hearing, please ask the question so it can be explained.
All of these elaborations are useful in that they explain what domestication means in various instances and phenomena, but it is still rare to find a concise and functioning definition of what it means altogether. If we need to do so, we could say rather simply that
Capture.
domestication is capture.
There it is.
Further, it is the capture of living beings.
Domestication is capture. Further, it is the capture of living beings by a dead thing. The dead thing is capitalism, and the integration of those beings into all roles and institutions which comprise the dead thing. So going back to gender, all roles, the gender binary, the integration of all these captured beings into the roles, the gender binary, and the institutions, the workplaces, the domestic institutions, which comprise the dead thing, which comprise capitalism.
If we need to do so, we could say rather simply that domestication is capture. Further, it is the capture of living beings by a dead thing, and the integration of those beings into all the roles and institutions which comprise the dead thing. Furthermore, it is all the practices. Primitivists seek to understand domestication at its origins, with particular attention to the cultures it destroyed. Insurrectionaries tend to explore strategies against the institutions of domestication in the present. Others emphasize the metaphysical and spiritual implications of domestication. Queer and feminist anti-civilization perspectives focus on domestication as the origins of patriarchy.
Oh,
An
there
introduction
it is. There
to
it is. There it is. So it's reading a footnote right now, but I'm kind of glad I let it read the footnote, to be honest. I think that was reading a footnote, wasn't it? Am I crazy? Where was it just reading? Here. Oh, here it is. Here it is. Queer and feminist anti-civilization perspective on the focus of domestication as the origins of patriarchy. All right. I'm starting to think that you are a troll. I'm just going to call you Rufus because I don't know how the fuck to pronounce your name. I'm starting to think that you're a troll. And I don't like that. Because you waste my time constantly asking questions that are not relevant to what's being said, that completely ignore things that I have literally just explained. And if you want to keep doing that, fine, that's up to you. But at some point, I'm telling you, I'm going to get tired of it. And I'm already starting to get there. So we're analyzing a really complex document right now. You have been asked not to do this multiple times. If you continue, we're going to have problems. Well, no, you're not trying to learn. You're being a dick. You're being a dick. What I need you to do is to open your ears and to listen. And if you are not going to do that, at some point, we have to say this isn't the right community for you, because this has been an ongoing issue now for a long time. We give you specific instruction, you ignore the instruction, you do whatever you feel like doing, you disrupt streams with these questions. I want people to ask questions, bro, but most of your questions could be answered by you listening to the things that I literally said 5 minutes ago. So that's what you need to work on. And if you're not going to do that, then I'm going to remove your ability to continue to annoy me. Yeah, please do that. Please go. If you're not going to listen, then please leave. Thank you. As was explicitly explained less than 5 minutes ago, they are using the term domestication as a reference to capitalism. Domestication is capitalism. And now they're saying in this footnote, domestication as the origin of patriarchy. That means capitalism is the origin of patriarchy, which we already knew because we've heard them say that 8 million times from Sunday.
Which force those beings to spiritually accede to their capture. And lastly, it is the discourse and ideology which justifies that capture. This capture is unending, and the dead thing can only continue its immortal reign if it continues to bring new living beings and commodities within itself. First mythos, Enkidu and Shamhat.
Oh,
Freddie
God.
begins his account of the first civilization emerging in Sumeria.
What?
He describes the rise of the first king.
Wait, is this honestly going to talk about the Anunnaki? Because I'm actually going to be really excited if this is going to talk about the Anunnaki. Glomez says, so it sounds to me like he's alluding to humanity being something that isn't fundamentally flawed, just fundamentally No, that's not what he's saying. That's not what he's saying at all. What he is saying is that capitalism is imposing an experience on us that is not our natural state. We are being domesticated to be separate from our innate state. Capitalism comes in and takes over our innate being. It takes over the world. They're literally about to describe how capitalism started in Sumeria. So I don't think your interpretation is correct, and I think we need to do a little bit more listening.
Freddie begins his account of the first civilization emerging in Sumeria.
Hang on. I'm going to say this too. Part of the challenge here is that people are bringing their own biases to what this information means rather than interpreting it as what it is. Okay? So Christians might be feeling a certain way because it mentioned religion earlier. Guess what? Religion is actually not the point of this document at all, in any way. But I promise you there are going to be Christians that are listening to this and watching this later getting all offended and having feelings over the fact that religion was mentioned because they are interpreting it through their bias. Your feelings do not change what is actually right in front of us. People need to start learning how to detach and look at the information for what it is without forcing their own personal bias on it.
Freddie begins his account of the first civilization emerging in Sumeria. He describes the rise of the first king, the Lugal, and from it all subsequent worm monsters. Sumeria is interesting to our inquiry because it is the birth of civilization, but also of the written word. From this ancient civilization, the oldest written story, that of the Sumerian king Gilgamesh, was etched into tablets of lapis lazuli. As its hero, Gilgamesh is responsible for instituting the ultimate domination of the Sumerian Leviathan over the wild world. He does this because he leaves no son to his father day and night endlessly. Gilgamesh, the shepherd of Uruk, the shepherd of the people, leaves no daughter to her mother, no warrior's daughter, no young man's spouse, no bride to her groom. In his endless mobilization of human beings, Gilgamesh built a human machinery which waged war against the wild earth. In response to Gilgamesh and his imposition of order, the gods created an equal who could oppose him. His name was Enkidu. Primeval in the wild, born of silence, knit by Ninurta, wore his body covered with hair on his head, as on a woman's, thick as Nisaba grain, knowing neither people nor place, dressed as Sakan commands, as the god of animals commands, as animals do. He fed on the grass with gazelles, he drank at springs with animals, satisfied his thirst with the herd. 11. But the hunters and shepherds were angry and terrified of Enkidu, who sabotaged their traps and released their animals. They went to Gilgamesh and asked for his help. He devised a plan involving Shamhat, one of the sacred prostitutes of the temple. He said, "Go take Shamhat with you. When the beast comes to the spring, let her strip off her clothing, reveal her charms. He will see her and approach, and the beasts will reject him." And so Shamhat and the hunter set out in search of Enkidu. The hunter said, "Shamhat, open your arms, open your legs, let him take your charms, don't be afraid, take his breath away, he will see you and approach, open your clothes, let him lie upon you, do a woman's work for the man, caress and embrace him as he..."
Okay. I know this is not like technically about socialism, but can we just talk about the language here? And guys, we're not covering breaking news right now because we're doing book club right now. I appreciate everyone respecting that. Open your clothes, let him lie upon you, do a woman's work for the man. Caress. This is actually the original Patriarchy right here. Do a woman's work for a man. Caress and embrace him as he embraces you, and the beasts will reject him.
The hunter said, "Shamhat, open your arms, open your legs, let him take your charms, don't be afraid, take his breath away, he will see you and approach, open your clothes, let him lie upon you, do a woman's work for the man, caress and embrace him as he embraces you, and the beasts will reject him."
I mean, this is the original, this is sex work right here. This is sex work because they're talking about this person as a sacred prostitute. So this is sex work. Sex work is capitalism because you are selling your body for personal private profit. Actually, like, leftists engage in sex work and promote sex work because it exposes the inherent exploitation of capitalism. This is something I've actually seen them write about. So one of the reasons they do it, even though sex work is technically capitalism, is the reason that they embrace sex work and honestly promote it amongst themselves, and queer people are always talking about how they're sex workers, is because they think that sex work is an indictment of capitalism because it exposes how inherently exploitative the system is. And here they are talking about Gilgamesh and the sacred prostitutes in which a woman does work for the man.
Shamhat opened her clothes, opened her legs, he saw her charms, she was not afraid, and he lay down on her, she did a woman's work for the man 6 days, 7 nights. Enkidu, coupled with Shamhat, breathless, when he had satisfied his desire, he faced the wilderness, the gazelles shunned him, and moved away. Exhausted, Enkidu's legs would not move as the beasts moved away, he could not run as he had before, but he had reason and broad understanding, he turned and sat at Shamhat's feet, looked at her face. 12. As she looked at his, he listened to her speak, "You are handsome, Enkidu, like a god, why wander the wild with the beasts? Come, let me lead you to Uruk the sheepfold, to the temple home of Anu and Ishtar." Enkidu agreed, but for the possibility of challenging the mighty Gilgamesh, but Shamhat convinced him otherwise. Gilgamesh had already dreamt of Enkidu's coming, and the king would take the wild one as a dearest friend, would treat him as a wife. He would domesticate Enkidu. Shamhat disrobed and dressed him in one of her robes. The shepherd set bread and beer before him, suckled on the milk of the wild Enkidu, looked, squinted, stared. He knew nothing of food. Shamhat spoke to Enkidu. Eat the bread, staff of life, drink the beer, destiny of the land. Enkidu ate of the bread until sated, he drank of the beer until sated. 7 mugs, he became a manifestation, dressed in robes, a warrior, who took up his weapons to fight lions. The shepherds rested at night, Enkidu fought off wolves, and lions. The elder shepherds slept, Enkidu stayed awake.
This is a trip.
13. The story of Enkidu and Shamhat is a story of domestication from within the mythology of the first civilization.
Okay, there it is. There it is. The story of Enkidu and Shamhat is a story of domestication, capitalism, from within the mythology of the first civilization. So they're really saying that this kind of this unnatural thing that created hierarchies and oppressed people has been around literally since ancient Sumeria. They're saying it's been around a long time. So when people say, like, you know, what happened, you know, before capitalism or things like that, the left literally, at least the extreme left, literally thinks this stuff has been around since ancient Sumeria. That doesn't mean it's our natural state, because they argue that it was something that was imposed on us. But yeah, they're literally talking about the first act of capitalism here. The first act of domestication.
The story of Enkidu and Shamhat is a story of domestication from within the mythology of the first civilization. It shows of the taming of Enkidu through the imposition of sex roles, the wearing of clothes, the drinking of alcohol, and his separation from the wild beasts.
So they're saying the taming of Enkidu through the imposition of sex roles and the wearing of clothes. So that's going to be, the imposition of sex roles is going to be talking about the gendered roles that people are expected to fill.
Shamhat is a sacred prostitute of the Sumerian temples, a spiritual practitioner of the oldest profession. She serves the goddess Ishtar through the rite of Hieros Gamos, the sacred marriage between the king and the goddess of the city. Ishtar is the goddess of nature, yes, but of nature within the city. Hieros Gamos, the sacred prostitution, is a ritualistic submission of nature to the power of the king, the bringing of the wild within the walls of the city. In this way, the nature goddess was also the goddess of arts of civilization. These arts included the practices of government and religion, war and peace, crafts, profession, eating, drinking, clothing, bodily adornments, art, music, sex, and prostitution. Theirs are the arts of living applicable to every aspect of civilized life. The goddess rules nature within the city, so her ars vivendi are the rules of civilization, of domestication. And so it was through these rules that Shamhat, a priestess of Ishtar, made Enkidu into a man. After he is torn from his world, Enkidu becomes a virile and bloodthirsty destroyer of the wild. The imposition of gender unleashes a continuum of separation which endlessly separates the city from the forest, humanity from the rest of wildlife, and splits humans into genders. Contemporary readings will of course illustrate a degree of misogyny around Shamhat, implying that women tamed the wild men. But this is incorrect and only reveals how deeply seated gendered domination is to civilization. Enkidu is domesticated by all the ars vivendi which define life in the first civilization, by women's work and men's work. Enkidu is made a man through these domesticating laws.
Hang on. Enkidu is domesticated by all the ars vivendi which define life in the first civilization, by women's work and men's work. That again is the patriarchy. The idea that there is women's work and men's work is what the patriarchy is. He is civilized by gender himself.
It could be said that perhaps no tendency has taken the question of gender further than primitivism. We say this because the primitivists view the question through the lens offered by a critique of domestication. While there are obviously heinous examples of masculinist and misogynist theories and individuals within anti-civilization thought, The most lucid and careful writers have always located the rise of patriarchy at the very beginning of civilization. For many, patriarchy
So now they're saying the rise of patriarchy at the very beginning of civilization. So capitalism created patriarchy, so capitalism was at the very beginning of civilization too. Which doesn't make sense if they're saying that capitalism isn't our natural state, but we aren't debunking them. That is actually what they think.
For many, patriarchy emerges alongside domestication, and the two are practically synonymous.
Bang.
We can even see small fragments of this perspective in Kamat's later writing, Echoes of the Past, for example. It is also acknowledged in the 2009 editorial statement of Bloodlust, a feminist journal against civilization. The editors articulate that their desire to publish the journal was a result of what felt like a superficial treatment of the critique of gender, and yet they still celebrate that the anti-civilization tendency is one of the few that consistently indicts patriarchy as a central enemy. While sadly the journal only released one issue, the task of fleshing out the anti-civilization critique of patriarchy seems like a step toward understanding domestication's centrality to gender itself. The primitivist perspective on gender is problematic for reasons we'll elaborate later, but for a moment we'll suspend our criticism so as to fairly lay out the argument. Whatever its flaws, this perspective on the rise of patriarchy is useful because it situates the emergence of gendered domination with civilization itself. In doing so, it refuses any ideology which fails to do so, by constantly demonstrating that such misery is older than most other institutions and systems of 14. Domination. It equips us with the necessary pessimism to respond to those who assure us that gendered violence will disappear after their specific reform or revolution. Kamat is indebted, with regard to his fleeting thoughts on gender, to a French writer named Françoise d'Aubonne. d'Aubonne is credited as the person who coined the term ecofeminism in her 1974 book, Feminism or Death. More interestingly, she was also one of the co-founders of the organization Front Homosexual d'Action Révolutionnaire, the same militant gay liberation group which Guy Hockingham joined and which shaped his later perspectives. It makes sense, then, that two anti-civilization theories of gender would emerge from the same action and discussions, d'Aubonne's ecofeminism and Hockingham's homosexual desire. It is a tragic detriment to our inquiry that almost nothing of d'Aubonne's writing is translated into English. Most Anglophone primitivists and ecofeminists have only been exposed to her ideas through secondary sources. We'll cite an excerpt from Feminism or Death, as it is unlikely that most readers would have access to the text. Practically everybody knows that today the two most immediate threats to survival are overpopulation and the destruction of our resources. Fewer recognize the complete responsibility of the male system, insofar as it is male in these two dangers. But even fewer still have discovered that each—
Hang on. I want to read that again. So this is from the excerpt of Feminism or Death. Practically everyone knows today that the two most immediate threats to survival are overpopulation and the destruction of our resources. Fewer recognize the complete responsibility of the male system, the patriarchal system, insofar as it is male and not capitalist or socialist, in these two dangers. That's interesting that it's saying it's not capitalist or socialist, that it's a male system. But even fewer still have discovered that each of the two threats is the logical outcome of one or two parallel discoveries which gave men power over 50 centuries ago, their ability to plant seeds in the earth as in women, and the participation in the act of reproduction. Their ability to plant the seed in the earth as in women. And make babies and have children. Okay, well, let's just see where this is going.
Practically everybody knows that today the two most immediate threats to survival are overpopulation and the destruction of our resources. Fewer recognize the complete responsibility.
Hang on. Captain is saying the far left is going after men. No, they're not. They're going after all gender. This document is literally a document that calls for the complete abolition of all gender. Not just men, all gender. So we've got to stop getting out of this. We got to start getting out of this conservative bullshit narrative, guys. It was never about eliminating men. It was never about eliminating women. It was always about eliminating all gender. Okay? So again, I'm going to give you the advice. Stop putting your own bias into the interpretation of what we're seeing. You've got to train yourself to do this. No one can train you to have a decompartmentalized approach to analysis other than you. Like, what you need to do is ask, does it really say the far left is going after men? No, it doesn't. It doesn't say that at all. Blaz on X says, it logically follows. They said civilization needs to go earlier. Now they're saying since the beginning, civilization was misogynistic and patriarchal. Of course they believe this. Although anti-civilization is radical, it also seems to be where this ideology leads if you follow the logic. Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, again, especially, these are the most dystopian texts that you're going to find anywhere. So of course they want to lead to the end of civilization. Gloria, you're trying to debunk them. Gloria says, remember the pre-modern world didn't believe women could contribute anything to reproduction. That's not the point, though. That's not the point. That's Gloria. This is a modern interpretation of the ancient world. This is not ancient history. This is a modern interpretation of the ancient world.
Practically everybody knows that today the two most immediate threats to survival are overpopulation and the destruction of our resources. Fewer recognize the complete responsibility of the male system, insofar as it is male in these two dangers. But even fewer still have discovered that each of the two threats is the logical outcome of one of the two parallel discoveries which gave men their power over 50 centuries ago. Their ability to plant the seed in the earth as in women, and their participation in the act of reproduction. Up until then the male believed impregnated by the god. From the moment he discovered at once his two capacities as farmer and procreator, he instituted what Lederer calls the great reversal to his own advantage. Having taken possession of the land, thus of productivity and of woman's body, it was natural that the overexploitation of both of these would end in this threatening and parallel menace: overpopulation, surplus births, and destruction of the environment, surplus production. The only change capable of saving the world today is that of the great reversal of male power, which is represented, after agricultural overproductivity, by this mortal industrial expansion. Not matriarchy, to be sure, nor power to the women, but destruction of power by women, and finally the end of the tunnel, a world to be reborn. Therefore, with a society at last in the feminine gender, meaning non-power, it would be proved that no other human group could have brought about the ecological revolution, because none other was so directly concerned at all levels.
Hang on, I need to listen to this again. I apologize. Up until then, men believed women were impregnated by gods. From the moment he discovered at once his two capacities as farmer and procreator. Farmer is someone that's exploiting the land as private property for their own wealth. Procreator is, of course, what it is. He instituted what Lederer called the great reversal of his own advantage. Having taken possession of the land, capitalism, thus of productivity, later of industry, also capitalism, and of a woman's body, thus of reproduction, also capitalism, it was natural that the overexploitation of both of these would end in this threatening and parallel menace: overpopulation, surplus births, and destruction of the environment because of surplus production. The only change capable of saving the world today is that of a great reversal of male power, which is represented after agricultural productivity by this mortal industrial expansion. Not matriarchy, to be sure, nor power to the woman, but the destruction of power by women. Okay, this is like a major aha moment. So they're saying men have fucked things up. Not men as in like, they're not, okay, the male system which privatizes property for men to use as farmers, where they create individualized privatized wealth, the male system of impregnating the women. The men have control of everything. The patriarchy gives men control of these things. With men in control of these things, they've created overpopulation because they're impregnating too many women. They're also destroying the environment because they're using tools to farm the land or whatever that is destroying the environment. So they're literally saying that the patriarchy is fucking everything up. And then they say, okay, so what do we do about this? The patriarchy is fucking everything up. The only change capable of saving the world today is that of the great reversal of male power, which is represented as agricultural overproductivity by the mortal industrial expansion. But they're saying we're not replacing men with women. Because remember, the patriarchy is a hierarchy. And so they don't like hierarchy. They want everything to be on the same level. They're not suggesting reversing the hierarchy. What they are suggesting is doing things to create a society of non-power. Non-power being no hierarchy. Okay? So they're like, the female aspect of it needs to counter the male in order to eradicate the hierarchy. Does everyone understand? Because they're saying it in, again, a really flowery, artful way, but that is what they're saying. They're not arguing for matriarchy. They're literally saying we are not arguing for matriarchy, to be sure, nor power to the woman. So they're not arguing for all the power to go to women, but the destruction of power by women. And what they're saying is that women need to be the one to do this. This is actually the most important thing. This is feminism, guys. This is why, what did they call this? Isn't this article called like Feminism and Death or something like that? They're literally saying women need to be the ones to destroy the patriarchy, but that doesn't mean they want women taking over. They just want women to destroy the patriarchy. That makes so much sense. And finally, the end of a tunnel, a world to be reborn and no longer protected as they still believed by the first wave of timid ecologists.
Therefore, with a society at last in the feminine gender, meaning non-power, it would be proved that no other human group could have brought about the ecological revolution, because none other was so directly concerned at all levels. And the two sources of wealth which up until now have benefited only the male would once again become the expression of life and no longer the elaboration of death. And human beings would finally be treated first as persons, and not above all else as male or female. And the planet in the feminine gender would become...
They're saying this is about degendering everything. They're saying human beings in our ideal world, in our utopian world, would finally be treated first as persons and not above all else as male or female. So they're arguing for no gender.
And the planet in the feminine gender would become green again for all. While simplistic and essentialist, this line of argument stands out for its singular elaboration of the intrinsic connection between agricultural production and human reproduction. We'll look 15 at others who've expanded on this theory, but we would be hard-pressed to find anything in the primitivist canon that deviates too far from this straightforward position. All of it will center the role of man as the husband to his wife and the practitioner of agriculture and animal husbandry. The argument is useful because it is an articulation of the way domestication captures both those humans assigned female and also a vast diversity of non-human.
Those humans assigned female.
The argument is useful because it is an articulation of the way domestication captures both those humans assigned female and also a vast diversity of non-human life. One can clearly see the echoes of this in a primer written by the Green Anarchy Collective. Toward the beginning in the shift to civilization, an early product of domestication is patriarchy.
This
The
is
formalization
so
of-
fucked. This is actually so fucked. So this is like I know this was like a really tough document to get through, and we've got a long way to go in this. This whole thing is going to be about 5 hours long, so we're going to do this in multiple parts, and we're going to stop when we get to a good stopping point. But this is actually so fucked. I haven't read this anti-civilization stuff before. I haven't encountered this anti-civilization stuff where they're literally saying that it's like, look at this. Towards the beginning in the shift in civilization, an early product of domestication is the patriarchy. They're literally saying that it has always been like this, but it's not our innate state, but we need to undo the thing, but it's always been this way, and because it's always been this way, that means we need to eradicate everything in order to find the innate core of who we are. This is messed up, man. And I know it can be a little bit tough to get through, but once you strip it down to the core of what they're arguing, they are literally arguing for the abolition of everything. You know, I thought when I thought that I have the abolish everything t-shirt sitting on my desk. You guys have seen that before. I thought that when socialists were arguing for the abolition of everything, they were arguing for everything related to capitalism, all the norms produced by capitalism. And we had previously heard them say that they believed that capitalism was created by farmers. Farmers were the first people to privatize the land. I just never thought of going back to ancient effing Samaria and saying that the patriarchy started in ancient America, or not America, ancient Sumeria, there we go, and that it's carried through to today, and it's the job of the women, the feminists, to destroy the patriarchy so that we can achieve this utopian world, but that involves destroying everything, like literally everything, because they believe that everything in the world is built up on this foundation. So when they're arguing for a utopian world, it is literally for a utopian world that has never existed. Wow. We got a long ways to go, guys.
Toward the beginning in the shift to civilization, an early product of domestication is patriarchy. The formalization of male domination and the development of institutions which reinforce it. By creating false gender distinctions and divisions between men and women, civilization, again, creates an other that can be objectified, controlled, dominated, utilized, and commodified.
There it is. By creating false gender distinctions and divisions between men and women, that's the gender binary. Civilization, which in order to be civilized, you have to be engaging in capitalism, again creates the other. Men in this case are the primary, women are the other, that can be objectified, controlled, dominated, utilized, and commodified.
This runs parallel to the domestication of plants for agriculture and animals for herding, in general dynamics, and also in specifics like the control of reproduction. As in other realms of social stratification, roles are assigned to women in order to establish a very rigid and predictable order, beneficial to hierarchy. Women come to be seen as property, no different than the crops in the field or the sheep in the pasture. Ownership and absolute control, whether of land, plants, animals, slaves, children, or women, is part of the established dynamic of civilization. Patriarchy demands the subjugation of the feminine and the usurpation of nature, propelling us toward total annihilation. It defines power, control, and dominion over wildness, freedom, and life. Patriarchal conditioning dictates all of our interactions, with ourselves, our sexuality, our relationships to each other, and our relationship to nature. It severely limits the spectrum of possible experience.
Okay, so now they're saying these categorizations created the hierarchy in which men oppressed women. We already know that. And they're saying patriarchy demands the subjugation of the feminine and the usurpation of nature. So they're saying it is not natural for women to be subjugated to men. That is what the patriarchy demands. And it is in that usurpation of nature we are being compelled towards annihilation. It defines power, control, and domination over wilderness, freedom, and life. Patriarchal conditioning dictates that all of our interactions with ourselves, our sexuality, our relationships to each other, and our relationship to nature. And they're saying that because the patriarchy is putting you in these rigid categories in which one group is being dominated and othered, that severely limits the possible spectrum of things that you are allowed to experience, because if you have to be in this little box, that means you don't have access to the full breadth of the innate human experience.
The interconnected relationship between the logic of civilization and patriarchy is undeniable. For thousands of years they have shaped the human experience on every level, from the institutional to the personal, while they have devoured life. To be against civilization, one must be against patriarchy. And to question patriarchy, it seems, one must also put civilization into question.
Okay, so again, it's really important that people understand that when they say domestication and when they say civilization, they mean capitalism. I know people make fun of me because capitalism means all words, or all words mean capitalism rather, but like, people really need to understand this, because I've already had to define both domestication and civilization multiple times based on the questions that I'm getting in the chat during this stream. You have got to understand this. To be against civilization, which means capitalism, one must be against patriarchy, which is something that capitalism created. To question patriarchy, which capitalism created, it seems one must put civilization, capitalism, into question. So to be against one is to be against the other thing, because civilization created the patriarchy. Capitalism created the patriarchy. And it's so like, it's fascinating that they're also using civilization though. They're not only using civilization to mean capitalism, they are also using it to mean everything, because they're saying that this started so long ago, like quote unquote civilized culture was created back in ancient Sumeria, and that was the point in which we departed from our innate being.
To be against civilization, one must be against patriarchy. And to question patriarchy, it seems, one must also put civilization into question. Freddie Perlman expands on this premise in a few ways. Firstly, he consistently centers rape and the weaponization of the phallus as methods intrinsic to domestication. He connects the phallic towers at the center of early Leviathans to the weapons used by their armies. For him, these institutions and apparatuses function to naturalize an unnatural form of domination and power, to subject women to men, and to pretend that this arrangement is the natural order of things.
To subject women to men and to pretend this arrangement or this hierarchy is the natural order of things.
At times he describes Leviathanic men as women haters. Secondly, he believes his story to be the process by which the men who control Leviathan narrate their own conquests and achievements. For him, his story is specific to civilized culture and only emerges as a violent annihilation both of a pre-existing matriarchy, but also through the deification of an image of militaristic, Leviathanic men as opposed to former nature goddesses. For him, the earth itself is feminine, a mother who gives birth to all life. By contrast, Leviathan gives birth to nothing but death, and as such despises the Mother Earth.
So they are kind of defining Earth as being a female because Earth gives birth to all life. Okay, I can understand that. And the Leviathan is going to be symbolic of maleness, or like the male world, which gives birth to nothing but death because that represents capitalism.
In the following fragments we'll criticize much of this theory, but it is worth acknowledging that it is rare to find another theory of his story which locates patriarchy as absolutely inseparable from civilization. Ibid. 16. John Zerzan expands upon the theory from a different angle. He primarily concerns himself with studying the work of over a dozen anthropologists who analyze the role of women in social arrangements before domestication.
Oh.
Many of these anthropologists were part of the shift in anthropology.
Okay, so now they're saying that this guy has studied with all women anthropologists who analyze the role of women prior to capitalism. So this is, what did women do prior to capitalism, prior to patriarchy, prior to civilization, prior to domestication?
Many of these anthropologists were part of the shift in anthropology referred to as the shift from man the hunter to woman the gatherer. Based on their research, he argues that the vast majority of sustenance in most non-civilized societies was provided by gatherers, who tended to be women. He argues that as a consequence, women had significantly more social power and autonomy because they were not reliant on patriarchal agricultural arrangements for survival. He also follows other anthropologists in claiming that hierarchies around gender were rare among American indigenous tribes, specifically noting the absence of fetishes for virginity and chastity, expectations of monogamy for women, or male control over reproduction.
Okay, so again, they're saying indigenous people didn't have this problem, okay? Like, so they're saying that this wasn't a problem among Native Americans until the Europeans came over to America and conquered the Native Americans, and then they imposed capitalism on them. They took all their land, they privatized it under capitalism, and they're saying all of this hierarchy stuff, like these hierarchies didn't exist in indigenous people.
He argues that the sexual division of labor, imposed by domestication, was the first form of the division of labor which constitutes contemporary civilization. He also criticizes the shift from communal tribal relationships of sharing to the privatized and gendered existence of the family form, arguing that the family is neither inevitable nor universal in human communities. Zerzan argues...
Hang on, we gotta take a moment on that. He also criticized the shift from the communal tribal relationships of sharing to the privatized and gendered existence of the family form. So the nuclear family as we know it today is a gendered existence, arguing the family is neither inevitable nor universal in human communities.
Zerzan argues that the shift toward domestication is marked by the emergence of specialized labor roles, the limiting of women's labor to reproductive efforts, and the strengthening of kinship bonds above all else. For him, the presence of a gendered division of labor by the time of the earliest recorded symbolic art indicates that it is this division which gave rise to all others.
Wow.
He refuses to believe that these phenomena are coincidence, instead pointing toward a causal relationship between the rise of gendered existence and that of domestication. Both are shifts away from non-separated, non-hierarchical life.
Okay, so now they're saying that it is not a coincidence that there is a casual relationship between the rise of gendered existence. When they say gendered existence, they mean men being in the workplace where they had all the money and all the power, women being in the home where they did all the unpaid labor of having and raising the next generation of proletarian workers in the nuclear family, the hierarchy that is patriarchy. They're saying that there is a casual relationship between this gendered existence and that of domestication, which we already know because domestication is a form of capitalism. And then he says both of these things are shifts away from non-separated, non-hierarchical life. So domestication is the opposite of non-hierarchical. Domestication means a hierarchy. Domestication also means, non-hierarchical is also the opposite of a gendered existence, which we kind of already know if you've been following my content any period of time. But this just confirms the definitions of the gender binary and the patriarchy as functions that were created by capitalism or social constructs that were created by capitalism that we've been talking about for a while.
He says, Nothing in nature explains the sexual division of labor, nor such institutions as marriage, conjugality, or paternal filiation. All are imposed on women by constraint, all are therefore facts of civilization which must be explained, not used as explanations. His explanation for these shifts involves both the ways that agricultural life immiserated the women it captured, but also that the introduction of patriarchy was a key strategy of colonial civilizers and missionaries around the world. He argues.
So the evil colonizers, one of their goals was to introduce patriarchy to the civilizations that they were conquering.
He argues that any attempts to destroy civilization must also be an attempted return to the wholeness of original genderless existence.
There it is. The wholeness, a return. The goal of destroying civilization is a return to the wholeness of a genderless existence. And let's just wrap up here with the last paragraph. I think this is a really good stopping place for today.
Much of the primitivist perspective on gender doesn't sit well from a queer perspective. Significantly, the emphasis on gender essentialism and the lack of substantive critique of compulsory heterosexuality, to say nothing of the role of anthropology. And yet still there is something which resonates in the theory. Perhaps the appeal of the primitivist answer is that it implicates literally everything about this world in the horror of gender. The food we eat, the cities we live in, the language we speak, our families, our fetishes, all of it interwoven into the fabric of gendered existence. The implication, then, is that any break from gender would require a break from literally all the assurances and comforts which maintain our capture in it. Even more powerful is a fiery insistence that our gendered existence is not inevitable nor laid out in the stars. Primitivism could be understood as an attempt to give words and evidence to a visceral experience of not belonging in this world, to the feeling in our bones and muscles which cries out against the gendering of our lives and possibilities. Primitivism asserts an outside and makes claims to certainty regarding the nature of that outside. We'll dispense with them on the point of certainty, but the outside itself calls to us. 17.
All right. I think we're going to end there. Now, like I said, guys, this is a really long book. We are up to section 5. If you're in the PDF, we are now on page 18. And I think that's a good place to stop. We still have about, looks like 4 more hours of reading in this book. So this is going to be a several-part series of analyzing this particular document. Now, if you're looking for the document because maybe you want to read ahead for next time, listen, man, I know the first part of that document was real tough to get through. I understand it. I really do. But like now we had to get through the tough stuff to get into like the crazy dystopian stuff, and now we're starting to enter, I feel like, into the crazy dystopian stuff. So if you want access to the document where you can find the full PDF or the website, head over to my Substack. That is Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. And what I need you to do is click on the book club link in the upper menu, and that's going to bring you to the homepage of the Counter-Revolutionary Book Club. And then you're going to find a document that says, or is titled, The Dystopian Documents Queer and Gender Activists Are Reading. And then scroll down, and you've got our book club list. This is Against the Gendered Nightmare by Baden. It is a 2014 document. You can find the full document in the Anarchist library, so you can see you can download it there. It is a long-ass document, guys. We got a long way to go, and I knew it was going to be long. I didn't know quite how long it was going to be. You can also download a PDF in the Anarchist library as well. This is all free and publicly available information. So if you'd like to read ahead, or if you'd like to go back and read some of this stuff again and come with questions, because I know a lot of that was confusing, please feel free to do so. I'm not sure when we're going to be doing the next recording of the Counter-Revolutionary Book Club, but just pay attention to my social media. We might be doing it tomorrow. We might be doing it later this week. We might be doing it next week. It just kind of all depends on other things happening in the world. We have to be flexible with what we can cover. And so we will be doing it next week at a minimum. We will continue at least. We may try to fit in another episode this week, though, just because I'm really fascinated by this and I want to keep going. And I think you guys want to keep going as well. So we're going to wrap up the stream for right now. Guys, I will be back at 9 p.m. Eastern time tonight for Disenrage with Jennifer. We're going to be talking about Edgar Cayce tonight, who I have never actually looked into before. So I'm really excited about that. I'm going to go take a little bit of a break. I hope you guys all have a great rest of your day. And we'll see you in a little bit for Disenrage. All right, guys, take care. We'll see you soon. Bye.
How are you feeling? How long have you been here?
3 months, May 17th.
And what brought you?
That's difficult to answer.
To give you some idea.
I am not completely like other people.
What do you mean by that?
People dislike me because I am not completely like them. I am trying to do with my life something which few people try to do, and this influences my thinking and consequently my action.
What is it you're trying to do with your life?
Play the piano for people.
I'm not clear. How is it that playing the piano for people has eventually resulted in your being here in the hospital?
That's difficult to answer.